I still remember back to the very first episode, getting all the way to the very end, and it's like, oh my God, I forgot to hit record or whatever it was.
Yeah, well, yeah, you said it crashed. So it crashed on the one machine, but then even better, you forgot that you had your backup.
That's right.
On your Roadcast.
Yeah.
And so you had it anyway, but we ended. So
I was like, oh my God, shit, guys, we just lost everything that we said.
Oh, it was awesome.
We're getting a little better at it now, I think. We're starting to, I don't know if I would call us professionals, but we're a little bit better than we used to be.
So I think you and I talked about it. I have a diving certification. I enjoy diving,
Mm-hmm.
And what that makes me think of was there was a course they give at the resorts, which I always call the How Not to Kill Yourself course. It's, just enough, right, to not die and see if you like diving before you actually come to your bigger certification. So they probably would not like that title as I like that title, but it's kind of what it is.
It's true.
I feel like what you just said, that's kind of where we are. We're at that stage. We've done enough podcasting to how not to kill ourselves, maybe, but we haven't gotten our first, full certification in it yet.
It's true. I really would love to do diving at some point in my life, but we've never had the chance.
You should try. And actually, the courses they do at some of the resorts, the ones I've at least gone to, is really good. And it allows you to learn enough, be safe, and go do like a 30-foot, open water, nice clear ocean, down south, not up here in the murky water. You should try it once if you've never done, or at least go take a class where you do it in the swimming pool, because then it's fully safe and you can just try it.
I think it's fascinating stuff. Like, I love to explore, as I know we've talked about a bunch of times, like, and that just seems like a whole nother way of exploring that I've never really had the chance to dive into.
Yeah.
Take that world.
Yeah. And it's an amazing sport. It really is. Even the most boring dives were still amazing. Like, you wouldn't see anything. There was nothing around, but it was still peaceful and relaxing. And it was still amazing to do.
Well, I grew up on a lake. And so, right on it, but I grew up right around a lake and I spent a lot of time on the lake. And I love being on the water. I love all those kinds of things. And I've just never had a chance to go
under it. Yeah.
Underneath the water.
Yeah. We'll have to work on that then one time.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting it's almost like a different world down there where it's like they, in a lot of ways, like you can't see in it and they can't see out of it. And it's pretty interesting. And it's the one one of the few spaces on the world where we're not the apex predator.
That is true.
Where it's like, you're just a thing down there that might get eaten. Who knows?
Yep. Shark Week, my favorite week of the year.
But that actually does kind of lead into the general topic of today, which, in the I love exploring, kind of category of life. I spent some time on the Gulf Coast, luckily right before this lovely hurricane came through. Yeah. And, I love kind of overlanding and getting out and jeeping and all those kinds of things. But when I was driving back from Gulf Shores, I noticed that Google Maps was taking me a very odd way. And I didn't really care because I just was like, yeah, whatever. Like, it must be the fastest way to get there. And I just didn't think anything of it. But as we were driving, it was taking me down some very odd roads. Like in one, I forget what town we were in, but we were on a main highway. It had me get off the highway, down the service road, and it looked like I was turning into an industrial park. And then I drove through this industrial park, through this neighborhood, like down this tiny little kind of road. Oh, and by the way, I was in a 35-foot RV pulling my Jeep behind me.
I was going to say,
so it's not like I was in just a little car. Like, and so I'm driving through this neighborhood, hit another road, And we started, driving down this other like 2-lane road back through the middle of nowhere, Alabama and Mississippi. And like as I'm driving, I'm like, this is weird. Why this cannot be the fastest way to get me from Gulf Shores to Memphis. There's no way. And by the time I got to Memphis, I was tired and didn't care and didn't think about it. Well, last weekend, I was down in Springfield, Missouri, doing a little kind of jeeping off-roading adventure. And we were out in the middle of absolute nowhere. And so I popped in home again on Google Maps. And it gave me two options. And the option that it wanted me to take was taking, again, back roads, back windy roads, back through the middle of nowhere. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. And I looked at the other option, and the other option's like a, 15-mile drive to a highway to the main interstate that literally drives me right back to my house. And I'm like, huh? This doesn't make any sense.
So far left to come back right.
Why? Like, and the way that it wanted me to drive was 25 minutes longer as well.
Oh, wow.
Which also didn't make any sense to me. And I'm like, okay, well, I need to figure out why this is. And so I started looking a little bit more. And one of the one that it wanted me to take had a little green leaf next to it. And I had to recognize that little green leaf from my Google Nest and other kind of Google products. And so I was like, wow, that's kind of interesting. And I started to dig down into why would it want me to actually do that? And of course, our AI friends are behind it. And I thought it would be an interesting thing for us to kind of talk about here on, or at least one of the topics to talk about today.
Yeah, and I think it's a great start. And then you found this article, what we're going to start with, because like you said, you didn't know what it was first. And then all of a sudden it clicked and it made sense. And somebody wrote an article on it.
Of course.
So just looking at this quick too, and this is something we're going to try in here. We tell everybody, right, is we read a bunch of different articles, we talk about them, but we haven't been mentioning them as much. We're going to have some fun and we're going to try to share a little bit more of this, and we'll put the links on the page for the podcast if anyone wants to read the articles that we happen to mention in our conversations, just to continue the conversation beyond. And if people are interested, they could always comment themselves in the comment section or on Twitter, and we'll continue the conversation beyond the podcast. So the article that's in here is from Fast Company. It said Google Maps will start showing you slower routes, which is exactly what you figured out.
That's right.
And it says the whole point is because it's trying to save our planet. It's trying to help all of us, right? It's trying to save my planet. You and I own Jeeps. My Jeep doesn't get 30, 40 miles to the gallon. I don't know if 25 miles out of my way is really saving the planet.
Well, it's miles per mile in a Jeep, but I mean, it's also built for something totally different. But, like I get what they're trying to do. And just here's a rundown of what they're actually trying to do. So they're trying to take the speed of the roads, the incline of the roads, the fuel consumption they think that you're going to consume during that. And they're trying to come up with I think the nicest way to put it is the cheapest way. Because if you're using less fuel, you're going to save money. Well, and it's also better for the environment, right? And,
but is fuel
I think we're being a complete a-hole to to the climate with all these things, but that's a whole nother topic. But in the end, like they're trying to figure out what is the most optimal way of getting you from point A to point B. Well, that comes with an awful lot of problems, in my opinion. One of them being, do we really understand, or does the AI that's calculating this does it really have all of the topographical information for the entire, country? Does it understand all of the stoplights that are there, the curves in the road that are there? Like, can it actually take all of that into account? The answer is
yes, maybe,
But then there's another problem on top of that is what kind of vehicle are you actually driving?
Yes.
And, at that point I had, so I have a, Toyota Tundra TRD Pro hybrid. But I was pulling my gas guzzling Jeep on a trailer behind it because it's the easiest, fastest, and cheapest way to get there and also consumes way less fuel.
Right.
But, it wanted me to drive stop and go curvy, windy, twisty roads to get to where I'm trying to go is not the easiest, fastest, cheapest, or most environmentally friendly.
Right.
It was literally the hardest way I could have possibly went.
Right. And you're stop and go, like you said, the whole time. And any eco-friendly car, even our Jeeps, mine does anyways, has the little indicator showing you when you're driving the most eco-friendly for your engine, right?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure on those back roads, that was not lighting up on any of your vehicles.
No, not at all. And it's, the other thing that is compounding to this problem is, are you driving an electric vehicle or are you driving a gas powered vehicle?
Right. True.
Because those also have very different ways of looking at things. So if you're driving a gas powered vehicle, driving highway speeds, you're going to get better economy, generally speaking. And, with electric powered vehicles, it's not so much the case. They don't really like driving high speeds on highways.
Right.
Because they're, like they both have their pros and cons when it comes to that kind of stuff. And so to me, how is that AI that's powering it going to be able to figure out with any kind of accuracy what the right way to go is?
Well, like
and the answer I come back to is it's not.
Well,
really,
it's missing parameters, right? So, like you said, the vehicle, the time of day, is it raining or not outside? Is there traffic or not? Am I tired? Don't leave me on the road if I'm tired. Maybe I'm trying to get home quick from work. Like, there's so many other parameters that it's not taking into account. The thing I thought of reading it was, are these changes to my benefit as a customer? Or are these for your benefit because it makes you feel better because you can tell the world you're trying to be eco-friendly and follow the billet we're getting from, our government and everybody else pushing to make these changes? Because I agree with you. Most of the things it's doing right now is not actually eco-friendly. It's worse, not better. Who's it for? And then if we feel it's for the customers, then give me the ability to control it better. So then let me put in some of those parameters so you have better data. And then you allow it to give me a choice, or even more so, just prompt me in the beginning of the system, or the session. So when I start a session, like when you did that, let it prompt up and say, what is your desired outcome? You need to get home quick, is like an emergency, and you got to get there, or my Jeep with the top off, and like you said, I want the joyride. Let's go for a ride.
Yeah. Well, you're seeing it pop up in a lot of areas. So like Uber. Once I started actually doing some research here, I've noticed a lot of really weird things. And, I flew back to St. Louis. I don't know if it was last week or when it was, but I took a Uber, I guess maybe 2 weeks ago. It doesn't matter. But I took an Uber from the airport to my house. And from that airport, you literally jump on one highway, jump on another highway. You get off at an exit, and that street will take you almost directly to my house. My house is 4 houses off of that main street. And that is the easiest and has to be the most eco-friendly way of doing it. It's the most direct. It's the most everything. And the last time the guy took me home, and I got home at like 1 o'clock in the morning. That was when I came back from San Francisco. Because I got back at like 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, no one on the road either, right?
We're on the second highway. The guy gets off at this little exit and starts driving through these neighborhoods. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I don't know, I'm just following the map. And I'm like, well, what is this? And I could see his phone kind of on the little, kind of, they all have them just kind of tacked to the screen there, or, up to the dashboard. And it had me like going through, twisting and turning through a bunch of stoplights, through a bunch of stop signs, to take the hardest way you could possibly get to my house.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, this stuff's actually popping up all over the place. And that is actually doing way worse to, from an eco perspective than the other way around.
So that just to throw on to that, because you give me an interesting idea I didn't think of before. Because we travel a lot, we're in cars doing that all the time, and 1:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, and you see that, what was the first thing you did? You got frustrated. Yeah. So there's a whole other byproduct of this that's more the emotional side of it, right? Or the stress side of it. How much is that annoying, I guess, or how annoying is that to people, right? That they're sitting in the back of a car like an Uber, or you're in your own car trying to get somewhere, and now it's causing you to stop at stoplights. It's causing you to get stuck in traffic, or maybe the construction on a back road. So now as well, now you're becoming an angry driver, and there's a higher chance of accidents or something else, or you're just being generally frustrated.
Yeah, I actually ended up telling the guy,
like which way?
I actually ended up telling the guy that was like, no, like you need to drive this way and then that way and then this way. If you're going to take this way, which is the back way to get into my neighborhood, like go this way and then straight over. Like I have a neighborhood and we're kind of a big park in the middle, and he literally was going to drive around the park, like take the whole back way.
Yeah.
And then you could get to my house easily. Nope. He's going to drive completely around the big park all the way to the other side. This is crazy to me.
Yeah.
But ridiculous. What this actually kind of reminds me of is the way back when Waze first rolled out, and all of the issues that it caused in like LA and other places where you had, neighborhoods that were quiet. Nobody ever drove through them. Like there wasn't a reason to drive through them. And then they rolled out Waze, and it started taking massive amounts of people through these little bitty neighborhoods to save people 30 seconds.
Yep.
On their commute back and forth. And this was back in 2011. Like, boy, how time has fun. Or time has fun. How time flies when you're having fun. Try that one.
Yeah. I use Waze.
But I mean, because I remember, and actually I found a little I forgot to put this article in our notes, but I had an article that was here around this where they the city of LA actually tried to go after Waze to get them to stop.
Oh, really? Okay.
Where there's some pictures in there, and we'll, like we said, we'll share all these links, but of just traffic jams through these little itty bitty twisting roads and neighborhoods up in the hills of LA.
Like,
and they tried to go after them.
That were no longer quiet towns.
And, there's an interesting quote in here from the Waze spokesman. Because like the LA neighborhoods, they tried to push back and push back and push back. And the Waze, so here's a quote from the article. It says, a Waze spokesman, oblivious to the irony, reflexively sneered that a group of neighbors can't game the system. Because they were trying to figure out how to make, get people out of there.
Yeah.
And, and I think a lot of this same thing that's kind of crept into kind of Google Maps could have a lot of that same problem. Like some of the neighborhoods that I was driving through didn't make any sense, especially in the vehicle that I was in. Like it's just crazy to see how, how all that stuff can really impact different, neighborhoods and all kinds of stuff without people really thinking about it.
Yeah. I mean, you see where I live. I live on a back road next to town, but on a back road. But all the roads where I live basically go to the city. So they all go north and south. There's only a couple roads that truly connect across. So I get a lot of traffic on my road of people trying to figure out a way to get from the main highway out on the east side to the one on the west side. But it's a quiet road, more or less. There's no sidewalks, nothing else. If your kids or anybody's near the side of the road, you could get hit by a car. When those apps start sending, doubling and tripling the traffic that comes down this road, now we've created truly a hazard, right? There's a good chance of a kid getting hit, or there's a good chance of them having an accident because it's not a straight road. Um, you know, I have 2 accidents in front of my house a year, guaranteed. There's a windy road
Yeah.
in the front and a brick wall. And most of the time, somebody doesn't look for a second and they run into it, which is also something I'm waiting to see AI cars do, which is our topic we're on here. But, it happens at least twice a year. Somebody takes out that wall.
Well, think about, whether it's, your wall or any of like, you have the problem of maps and the routes that they want to take. And, they are going to try to optimize for efficiency. And then you have them be autonomous. And now all of a sudden you have, potentially neighborhoods being infested, for lack of a better word, with self-driving autonomous cars.
Right.
And where is the most dangerous place for a self-driving car to be is in some kind of neighborhood.
Yeah, instead of on a highway.
And
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that's where you're going to have the most variability of environments, where you're going to see, like the commercials back in the 80s and 90s where like there's kids like, oh, here's this little red ball like bouncing across the road. Like,
Yep.
I mean, that stuff can happen. And so how do you, when you think of safety and you think of like optimization of times, like those two things have to play together in a way that we have to think about as a society. What do we want, and how are we going to push some of these companies to do what we want? Because inside of that Google article talking about the maps, they are blatantly calling out that they are trying to change the way people think and work and operate.
Yeah. And I have 2 things. One was from what you were saying before, and I really think it's important that if they're going to try to create this in the way they are creating it, they need to take in effect, like we said, size of vehicles, somebody's health, because you might have health risks that you shouldn't be in the car for that extra amount of time, right? We need to take those into account, and it should not be dictating how you drive. Now, the second part of it, like you said, is I asked myself the question after reading it, is this, really focused on helping us or helping, us as a customer? Or is it helping them for their greater good or whatever they want to push towards, which seems to be a problem in a lot of companies nowadays and a whole different discussion. But then that says, okay, is this creative destruction, right? So creative destruction is a healthy thing when done in a smaller increment, I guess. Like it's the idea that horse-drawn carriage was replaced by a car, but over time, that the internet replaced a lot of brick and mortar stores, or email is replacing snail mail and like those types of things. But they don't happen drastically and really fast either. They have to happen over a certain amount of time. Otherwise, you create a paralysis. And I don't even think that AI itself, my personal thing at the moment anyway, is that format. I think it's another tool that's coming into our space. I don't know if it's really going to be removing something else, because theoretically, based on that definition, it's replacing all of us. And that maybe is a good thing or not, but that could be bad.
Well, it's replacing the decisions that we have to make on a day-to-day basis, which is scary.
Yeah.
Because to the point we made before, does it have all the parameters necessary to be able to actually make that happen? And, we all inherently have a set of morals and ethics that we follow, whether we, the way we were raised, the community, whatever. There's a whole bunch of things that impact it. And we are kind of born with them, and they grow with us, and they change with the way that we, experience life. AI doesn't have any of that.
Right.
At all. Like, it doesn't have a moral center. It knows what it's been programmed to optimize for.
Right.
And, right now, like, with the map directions. Like it's being optimized for what it believes is the most, eco-friendly way of doing it.
Because it's being
That clearly needs to be tweaked because I don't think that that's correct, but
right.
but a lot of it has to do with, does it have all the right information?
Yeah.
And, that is a very
and who is it serving?
That's right. And that's a logical problem though. Like you can figure, like, okay, well, you can input what kind of car you have, what, is it a gas or is it electric? Are you towing something? Like you can enter in all of those parameters and it could give you the best insights. But when it comes to a morality question, you now have all kinds of problems to figure out because, in a world where nobody can seem to agree on anything anymore, you are now having to make really, really hard decisions on what is the right course of action.
Right. So, and this leads into the other article we were reading, right? So, Secure World was the other one that popped up, and it was self-driving cars, the ethics of who should die in a crash.
Yeah.
Definitely a hard question.
This is a really, really hard question. And, we'll have to kind of describe this picture a little bit. But so take a 2-lane road that has a sidewalk on each side and in a set of buildings. And there is, a barrier there. There's people standing on the sidewalk, and then there's people walking across the
what they call it? Crosswalk.
Ooh, I got words. And, something was blocking the AI car. And now that thing goes away. Now, all of a sudden, it has to make a decision of, do I run over the people in the sidewalk? Do I run into the concrete barrier and hurt the people inside the car? Do I swerve onto the sidewalk and hit the pedestrians? Like what is we have to program what it should do in this scenario.
Right. What's the least evil?
And that is a really, really hard question to answer because you're, as a human, you're going to react based on your kind of, your gut. Like, what's your gut reaction of what's the best thing to do?
Yep.
And an AI just doesn't have it.
Right. And that's a good point too, right? Our experience and our level of driving, like our experience in driving, how many years, what we've done, situations we've been in, might look at that situation and be able to find a way out of the problem, right? I might have to flip my car, but I don't injure anybody inside of it. I just bang them up a little and I didn't hit any of the pedestrians. And okay, I had a way to figure out how to stop that car without causing, basically killing somebody. The AI is not going to do that. It's just going to make an if-then statement.
That's right.
And that's a good point. And then how do you do that? And what are you okay with?
Well, even back to that is a very kind of an academic question, but take a more real life question, back to your neighborhood and having autonomous cars driving through there or driving through neighborhoods because it's the fastest way. Okay, well, that little red ball bounces out and here comes a little kid running out in front of it that you didn't see because they were hidden behind a whole bunch of bushes or something. And your sensors didn't pick it up. Now you have to make a decision like your road. You've got on the one side, you've got the concrete wall or the brick wall. And on the other side, some of that stuff's got a pretty steep incline off the other side.
You will flip the car, yeah.
Yeah. Do you hit the kid? Do you go into the ditch? Do you what do you do? And that's interesting. And in this same article, they did a survey of people asking them basically, what do you do?
Yep.
In these different scenarios, what do you do?
Yeah, because when you read it, it says, if the vehicle was out of options, had to avoid the accident, what would it do? Would it spare the lives of the occupants and swerve into the sidewalk and hit the pedestrians? Or should it ram into the other car ahead of it, killing the passengers, but protecting the pedestrians? And I know I shared it earlier with you. I thought of the movie 2001 Space Odyssey, and I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that.
Yeah.
It's
like,
not going to do what you ask it. It's going to make a decision, but
that's right. Well, and you're not even going to have time to tell it.
No, not at all.
That stuff happens so fast that you're just out of luck.
Yeah. Now there is a chance that that's the one-off, actually 1% of worst situation, which it needs to handle. The good thing is hopefully it can handle every other situation well. So this is the hard one, but
look at how, I mean, even if it's a 1% problem, look at how many miles are driven every year in the US in cars. Like it is millions and millions of miles that are driven. And if a 1% is actually honestly really high.
Yeah, it's still a lot. Now, what I found funny, just to add some levity to this, is they do have the graph in the article of, if you were they did a survey. What was the survey? 40 million decisions in 10 languages from millions of people in 233 countries, because each country they found decided differently than another country. Basically, we all decided the quality of life or the importance of life across different factors, whether it be our age, our nationality, our country. Like it's an interesting article, and MIT ran this research. But what I found out of the thing, and I laughed, was nobody likes cats.
Nobody likes cats. You do not want to be a cat. You're like, it's pretty clear. You don't want to be a cat, a criminal, or a dog.
Right. You could be a baby in a stroller and you're all set. You're good. Yeah. Nobody's going to hit the baby. The baby's safe. But if you're a cat, no holds bar. This is
no, that's it. You're done. and even over dog, like the bottom 5. Well, we'll talk about the bottom 3 is dog, criminal, and cat.
Yeah.
And the dog and the criminal are just over like 0.1, and then the cat is like 0.8 or 0.18.
Yeah.
And it's significantly worse than all of the rest of them. It's pretty staggering.
Yeah, the old woman's got a better chance than all of them, like by 2/3. Yeah, it's crazy.
But there's some really interesting things in here. Like it's honestly not as skewed as I thought it might be for some things. Like, and I would have to see the question that they asked, because a lot of these kinds of surveys are so dependent on exactly how the question's answered. But the top 3 were, saving a stroller, a girl, and a boy. And I don't know exactly, like, those are weird words to me to use, like in some kind of a survey. Like, and then
I'm thinking they mean girl and boy, and that one is young kids.
Oh, okay. That's what they mean. Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, like kids essentially. So stroller, young kids.
Yep.
And then, pregnant. And then strangely, like doctor, like male and female doctor is an odd thing to put there. But
yeah, because it has doctor, athlete, executive, and then large people, like, and then homeless. They're weird. Weird words, the way they're used,
weird
right?
Words.
The weird.
And you have old man and old woman.
Yeah.
Which, are towards the bottom. And I think that one would actually probably be very different.
Like depending by male on doctor, they mean culture. Just a professional. So somebody dressed as a professional, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Very, very, very interesting. And I think that this is very, could be very skewed depending on your culture and those kinds of things. But
yeah. Which is why they went multi-country, is they were trying to get so that could be from translation too, like other country translation, different languages. But I would agree with the most part. I think people would try to, I would hope anyway, right? If you had to make the decision yourself in a car, you're going to try to save a young life. That's the way our brains think normally. And though nobody ever wants to hit a cat or a dog, if your decision was that or killing a bunch of people in a car, you're going to go towards the animal and then try to swerve the animal under the tires, right? And try to, again, do the best you can to not hurt anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the words are weird, but I think that the test is interesting to see how people think. What I think comes out of it is this generally, or my thought was, this is generally a moral dilemma that everyone who drives has. It's not just the AI and all of a sudden this is a new thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And are people bothered by it so much? Even our discussion here might annoy some people, right? But are people bothered by it so much because it's just out in the open? Or have they really?
It's a question that you have to answer. And then it's very uncomfortable because, it if you're driving a car and this situation comes up, you don't ever want to have to answer that question before the situation comes up, because it's really it's uncomfortable to say that, well, in this scenario, this is the person that I'm taking out. And, that's hard. But, when we think about programming an AI, we have to. You have to start to come up with these ethical questions to figure out, how do we actually program these things to make decisions that could lead to life or death?
Right. Well, the difference is we've learned through our lives, hopefully brought up well, to make the decision the best way we can. But we're already programmed to have that thought process. When you started driving a car, you knew this was a situation you might have to deal with as well. The AI doesn't have that. So somebody literally has to sit down and write a set of if-then statements, more or less, right? We have to program this thing to make a very fast decision. And it's going to do it based off of all the knowledge that we give it and a decision tree of how to figure it out, which means you have to write that decision tree. You have to teach it how to come up to the best of the worst case.
That's right. And, it really all comes down to, how do you give it that kind of information? And, I also think this goes back to, well, I don't know if we can give it that much information. And I think that's part of the problem that I have with some of this is, like, when I look at this list of people, how are you gonna know that, even like, is a woman pregnant? Like, maybe you might be able to tell. There's some people that they're 8 months pregnant and you can't tell.
Right.
But there's some people that are a month pregnant and they look 9 months pregnant.
Some people that are not
how are you really going to tell? Or even the differentiator between a boy and a girl.
Correct.
Or like it,
It's getting harder and harder nowadays, right? How does the AI know the difference?
Well, it's like, okay, well, you got a boy and a girl going to the gym and they're both in, just kind of like just Adidas clothes or whatever.
Right.
And they both got a hat on, like,
or they both have long hair or something else. You won't be able to tell.
I mean, it's really difficult. Yeah. And so, like, getting down to this level, I don't know if we can, but
this just means that everybody should walk around with a stroller is all this really means.
That's right. That's exactly right.
It's a safety measure for autonomous cars. You just need a stroller.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, in the end, I think there's some really fundamental rules that we are going to have to come up with as a society around self-driving cars.
Well, let me ask this question to it. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, and it really comes down to, in my opinion, where are these cars going to be driven and who is going to be responsible for them when things go wrong?
Yeah.
And like I said earlier, I spent some time in San Francisco recently, and they have the cruise, self-driving cars that are there, and they're causing all kinds of issues. Like, one of them was blocking a ambulance the other day, just wouldn't get out of the way. And they're kind of doing their best, but they're like, it's when odd things happen, they don't know what to do, and so they do nothing.
Right.
Which is what it seems to come down to. And to me, the scariest part about this whole thing is when you blend humans and AI, just in the car scenario, a human driver and an AI car driver, like, that becomes a bit of a problem. And how do you keep those two things apart? And it's like, to me, I think it makes a lot of sense to have self-driving cars on highways because they're generally protected from pedestrians, the soccer ball coming across the road, all those kinds of things, because our highways are generally fairly protected. But when you get into, cities, maybe downtown, downtown San Francisco, Manhattan, and New York. But the minute you get out of any of those, there's too much, and this whole ethics question around kind of who do you run over? I think the best answer that we can come up with is remove that scenario from coming up whenever possible.
Yeah.
And when does this scenario come up? It comes up in cities. It comes up in areas where pedestrians and self-driving cars meet. And when human driving cars meet, right? Like this is a problem. And, how can we use these tools to their best ability and separate them as much as possible? I think is the only way we can go about it.
Well, you have more people falling asleep, forget about drinking and all of that, but falling asleep driving on long straight rides on a highway. So to your point, it makes more sense if we could leverage it there, and it knows where the cars are on the edge of the road, and it keeps me in and keeps me going. That could help me get someplace if I'm driving very long rides on very, dark roads in the middle of the night.
I mean, you ever driven across Kansas? Like, no shot against our Kansas friends, but like it is boring.
Well, some of the upper roads in New York have done that to me too, and hours of just looking at open fields,
just straight. There's I love exploring in the Jeep and all kinds of stuff. And, I live in St. Louis, Missouri, and to get to the mountains, I got to drive across Kansas, and it is just Highway 70. You don't even hardly need to turn the steering wheel, just go. And that's a perfect example of like, if you could create, kind of smart roads that can give you information, you can have cars that can talk to one another. And I know this is really far few. I mean, we're not anywhere close to this, but even in just, you cannot drive on a highway as a human. Like that to me seems like the best first thing to do. Like, you know what? We have cars that are smart enough to do this thing. They can talk to one another. They can talk to the road. You are no longer capable of driving on a highway.
But that's where the creative destruction thing is important, and how fast you do that, because we're trying to force that with electric cars, not to side track too much, but we're trying to do that so fast that the world, the way people think, our infrastructure, everything can't move as fast. So we're creating more chaos instead of clarity. And I think this is a good example where, like you said, the future, that's awesome. How we get there, we need to take baby steps, and we need to do this logically, or we're just going to destroy our ecosystem. We're going to destroy the infrastructure, and we're going to drive people crazy trying to get there, where none of it's going to work when we get to the other end, right? It's going to be worse, not better.
Well, the other challenge with that is really, the problems of self-driving cars in New York City or LA or San Francisco or, Dallas or, those kinds of major cities is very different than what it is in Albuquerque, New Mexico, or, those types of cities. Like it's different. Like your infrastructure is different in New York. And you could very legitimately say pretty close to saying, we are not going to allow cars in Manhattan anymore. Like that's not a totally unreasonable thought.
Right.
And they've got the trains, they've got, you could even say no human driving cars are allowed in Manhattan, because it's a freaking grid. Like it is easy for a self-driving car as possible.
Not if you've driven in the city.
You could make those kinds of things, but you couldn't do that in Topeka, Kansas.
Right.
Because it's a totally different world. And the people that are generally coming into those kinds of cities live in suburbs, live in these other things that makes it almost impossible to be able to kind of grid those things off.
Yeah, it's interesting. So there was another, just to kind of move it forward a little bit on this, because we came across a couple articles that were really good on this. And the other one was the research that if we have the car set up this way, right, and we're gonna say the car has to make that hard decision, right, or just your green leaf journey you had the other day, is it a bad computer making bad decisions, or is it people just blaming the AI for their own bad decisions, right? What I found interesting was like one of the articles you read through asked a couple questions, and one of them was, participants were asked if they considered the navigation aid responsible, or did they just see it as a tool? And it was interesting, very human interaction in this way, that if it was wrong, we blame it. If we think it's wrong, we blame it. But if it seems to be kind of right, we start to do the more the fallacy effect side of it, right? And we start to just trust it. We just start to believe it because, oh, this thing's right every time. I know I'm just as guilty because I've been using Waze since Google bought it a lifetime ago, and before that even. And I like it. I find that when I don't pay attention to it, I end up sitting in traffic somewhere. And if I use it, it does save me time. It at least gets me where I'm going in the time that I expect it to take me. And it's been doing that now for me for 10 years?
Yeah. Well, on my trip back from Gulf Shores, and that same trip, we were going through Mobile, and it's like, hey, you should get off here and take this other highway. And I was like, no, you just want to drive me through the back of middle of nowhere, blah, 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 in my brain. And then I sat through a 40-minute delay with an accident in the tunnel in Mobile. And so it's like, ooh, like, you tried to tell me. You even like, I got on the highway, and then even the next exit, it's like, hey, you should get off here. And and it was all my fault. Yep. And it cost me 40 minutes of sitting in just dead stop traffic trying to get through downtown Mobile.
Yep. It's happened to me many times, and all I do is just laugh at myself. I'm like, oh, the one time I decided not to listen, it's like,
Well, and it goes down to, I think, a little bit of what you were saying is like, how much do I trust it at any particular time? And, it's like a point system. And okay, you did me good this time, so you get +1 point. You did me really good this time, so you get +2 points.
Yep.
Nope, you drove me through the middle of nowhere, -5 points. Like, how do I feel about you at any particular moment? Is like, how much are you going to kind of give it credit or kind of just throw shade at it, or listen or not listen?
Yeah, we're trusting it the same as we trust people. We are doing it based on varying levels based on, like you said, how it's working, how we're interacting with it, what we expect. The article was kind of cool. It said people might apply different moral standards for praise and blame. When a crash is averted and no harm ensues, standards are relaxed, making it easier for people to assign credit than to blame to non-human systems. So if it's doing good, like you said, then I'm going to start giving it, praise, and I'm going to start thinking. The problem is, do we get to the point where it's doing what is it called? Anthropomorphized, which is basically making it, like godlike.
That's right. And it's, you see this going all the way back to the beginning of like the self-driving age, and like the original, like, I think it was Google, their car, where they were giving people the ability to take this car from like up to their offices. And they're very, very clear. Like, you have got to pay attention. Like, this thing is in beta. Like, you got to pay attention. And, there's those people just passed out in the car. Just, we have this weird just ability to weirdly trust things that if you think about it for more than 5 seconds, you shouldn't.
Yeah.
And, anthropomorphizing things is really a great way to kind of put it, where it's like, to their point, like, the richer the interaction, the easier it is.
Yeah.
And in that model, it's a completely immersive interaction. It's doing everything for you. And, I've ridden in a self-driving car only once, and it drove from Austin, Texas back to Dallas. And it was pretty wild. Like, I sat in the driver's seat or the passenger seat in the front. And for the first 10 minutes, I was just kind of clutched. I don't know, man. Like, this thing's like
getting ready to jump out.
It's driving itself. Like, like, we can't even get like Windows to work right. Like, we're going to hope like this thing's just going to drive me.
Yeah.
And after, 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, like, you could just feel like your blood pressure coming down, and it shouldn't, but it does. And halfway through, I'm just sitting there, just BSing with the other people in the car, just having a good time. And, it's crazy. Like, in hindsight, thinking about it, it's kind of crazy to to be able to be that relaxed with something that quickly, but it's almost impossible not to, from what I've seen.
Well, because we are comfortable in a car, and if we feel like something has control, then we can relax. But that doesn't mean it actually has control. So yeah, it's an interesting situation. Where years from now, people will just get in cars, won't even think twice about it, right? But for us, it's weird.
Well, and I know I've already made this point a couple of times, but to me, the scariest part is the human. Like, I trust, like, even like the self-driving things, like, I can see trusting that in the right environment, but humans can and will do really dumb things for no apparent reason very, very quickly. And that's the stuff that is worrying. And, there's all of like the examples of like some of the Tesla crashes where it's like, hey, the Tesla car didn't see the car stopped in the middle of the road and just ran right into it at 90 miles an hour. And it's like, well, yikes.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like, well, it works really good until it doesn't. Yep. And that's the scariest part.
So there was a quote right from CNN, article from CNN. It said, before AI can take over the world, it has to solve one problem. The bots are hallucinating.
It's true. Right. And that is like, that's the, like, well, I think we need to separate these out a little bit because, excuse me, when I think of like the self-driving or the creation of routes for driving, that's narrow AI.
Yes.
Where it has a very specific thing that I want you to go do, and I want you to be very good at it.
A better chance of success because of that. It's not trying to be a person. It's not trying to have, innate knowledge like a human for everything. It's one thing, do it really well.
Well, and that's where the like large language models come in, because they're trying to do lots of things, and it's trying to be able to, respond in a lot of ways to a lot of different things. And that's really where the hallucinations really start to come in, because it's, there was in the same article, there's an interesting quote from the guy who helped create the kind of the AI Bill of Rights, and his name's Suresh, and I am not even going to attempt to say his last name. But he had an interesting quote in here that says, the technology underpinning AI tools like ChatGPT are simply trained to produce a plausible sounding answer to users' response or to user prompts. So in that sense, any plausible sounding answer, whether it's accurate or factual or made up or not, is a reasonable answer. And that's what it produces. There is no knowledge of truth here.
Yeah.
And that last piece there is, and I know we've talked about this in our previous kind of AI episodes, but it does not know what the truth is. It does not know what any of these things are. It does not know that information. It just knows that this is what the most probable thing to say after this thing is. And that's where these like hallucinations come from. And I have to put them in kind of air quotes, because in these models, they're not really hallucinations. It didn't have a really high probability for what it thinks you should say here. And so it gave you what it thought the best thing was. And it was just wrong.
Right. And it doesn't know right or wrong. It's just trying to give you the best possible answer, because it's trying to do the one thing it's told to do, which is to help you. And it's trying to do its job and give you the best answer to your question. Yep. Hmm. The problem is that we have the trust fallacy, is people blindly trust that answer, and then they start learning the wrong information.
That's right. And then that information gets perpetuated out, and, you have the issue of that information now being fed back into models. And now all of a sudden you're diluting the pool of information that's there versus, what's right and what's wrong is is hard because, you can't even like right and wrong is a binary choice.
Right.
And at some point, just like what we were talking about with the other models, someone has to decide whether it's right or wrong. And it's never that simple.
Well, we were talking about Google Maps before. I came across an article, which I didn't keep up for this, but on Google's website for Google Maps, it talks about how it was using AI to better search for and correct incorrect data, basically in the system, basically looking for people who might have put in bad information or fake information that was then creating, bad routes or bad things. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I said, let me do a search. And I found in 2019, Google Maps led 100 different drivers into a muddy field out in the middle of Denver's airport. And it just sent them out to the middle of the airport. In 2021, it led a group of hikers into a closed section of the Grand Canyon. And it was closed due to safety concerns. In 2022, it led drivers to a dead end in the Sierra Nevada mountains, where they ended up having to get rescued because it was during winter and snowstorm and stuff, and they got trapped. So like that data is in there and it's impossible to manually find. So this is a good reason for some of the AI stuff, right? And it's not the cars specifically, but it's in the map app that's helping on the car. So they're using the tools to clean the data up to hopefully not have those weird things happen. But I did find that to be interesting.
Well, and that stuff happens more often than you'd think. It's like in like the, kind of overlanding off-road world, like you tend to explore, and there's a lot of people, some of the YouTube channels that I watch.
Yeah.
They help go rescue people. And it's like, oh, well, how did you end up here? Well, Google Maps led me here. And it's like, well, you're in a Toyota Camry, and did you not look down the dirt road that's rutted out 3 feet before you decided to just keep driving down the road?
Did you think you had clearance for that? Yeah.
And yeah, it's kind of crazy how all that works. And, the other part is like, who's responsible when you have that, whether it's, a car accident, whether it's, Google Maps drove me off the Grand Canyon or like whatever, like who's actually responsible when these things go wrong? And I don't think there's a lot of answers there yet, but it's something that we're really going to have to figure out, because, our car company is going to be held liable when their self-driving car runs into something.
And not even just cars, right? At AI and almost anything. If we start saying everything is powered by the computer, then who's responsible when it makes a mistake?
That's right. And, who's going to pay for something when something goes wrong? And, it also even goes down to, will we even own cars in the end? Because if you have, AI powered cars that are, driving you around and all of those kinds of things, and you don't have any liability for, like if this thing does something stupid and it's not your fault, like why would you ever buy one? And, especially in cities, will there be ways of just, it's almost like automated taxi service?
Yeah. And again, somewhere in the future, maybe people still love driving cars, owning cars.
I love driving cars. Like I'm not.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, and that's a whole different conversation, because that gets into subscription models. And is the subscription model good for the consumer or just good for the company? Because those kind of models allow companies to make a lot of money and people not to own anything. And then you're controlled by everything that you're signing up for, because you don't actually own anything. And that's a bad thing. So this is a rabbit hole.
I think we should actually talk about that. That's somebody else. Cause like, was it BMW's charging like $1,300 a year for the heated seats and all kinds of dumb stuff, but we can get to that at some other point.
People go into debt because of so much subscriptions, and most people forget. So yeah, we should definitely cover on that one. But for what you're talking about now, there was a really cool article we came across from Scientific America that talked about exactly what you said. Who's liable when AI kills? And it's a very valid question. The car you mentioned, the Tesla driver back in 2019, the AI navigation killed 2 people in an accident, and he faced 12 years in prison for that. Now, was the fault his or was it the AI? And it's a good question. The article starts to look at liability rules. And I think it's interesting because they haven't caught up to AI yet. At least my understanding. I'm not a lawyer, but in reading some stuff, right? Liability rules are designed for when humans cause injuries, right? But not AI. So how do we adjust those to cover for AI when the policy, as I understand it, is that, let me see, basically the liability is somebody who does something that is unsafe. I'm going to take this part out because I can't find my wording. But
yeah, no, and honestly, just take a second, read it, and we can just chop it up. Like, I forgot to read this. I forgot to read this article.
Yeah. Well, what I wrote was liability rules were designed for a time when humans. I'll just put that in and I'll start with that part. But it was the article talks about liability rules were designed for a time when humans caused more injuries. But with AI, errors may occur without any direct human input. So the liability system needs to be adjusted accordingly. Bad liability policy won't just stifle AI innovation. It will also harm patents and consumers, because if we don't fix the liability side of this, right, we're going to be afraid to innovate. We're going to be afraid to create new products if companies fear they're just going to get sued, or if people believe that the car companies can do whatever they want because they're protected and you're going to get sued personally. So now they don't test the code as much. They don't worry about exactly how it works because it doesn't hurt them, right? So it's opening this gray area that, if it's not defined, will either stop innovation or cause huge issues from a liability standpoint.
Yeah, yeah, this is definitely, again, not a lawyer, but I think this is really interesting stuff that we are going to have to figure out, because to me, there should be liability on the companies creating these things to have high quality stuff.
Yeah.
And, like, really across the entire conversation we've had so far, like, okay, well, person writing, like, you're making ethical questions. And if you make bad ethical or your ethical decisions, then you should be held liable for that. If you're putting this thing out there and saying that it's going to do X, Y, and Z, and it doesn't, like this example, like, I don't know this example all that well, but if it was in self-driving mode and it failed, that should not be the driver. Well, to me, there is no driver of the car. If it's in self-driving mode, there is no driver. It is the AI. And at that point, it is the person that created that AI. It is they should be the person to hold liability. Because, when you see, to the point you made a little bit ago, the runaway injection of AI into everything, that should not be plausible deniability for a company to be like, yeah, well, I mean, the AI hallucinated. It's not my problem.
Right.
Like, it is your problem.
Who knows what it thought? I don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
You put this thing out there. You should be responsible for it.
It's your child. Take care of it.
Yeah. And, I mean, I'm a technologist. I'm all of these things, and I absolutely want to see things continue to grow and grow and grow. But at some point, you have to protect the consumer. You have to protect the people that are there. And you just have to.
I agree with you 100%.
It's going to take a while for this stuff to kind of catch up from a legal perspective. But, I have no desire to own an AI powered car because of a lot of these things. Like, I don't use a lot of AI powered tools because I think there's an awful lot of legal ramifications that are still going to come from some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And, we're just going to have to see how this stuff goes.
Yep. To this article, there was the other one that we came across that I think that matches well to what you're saying and kind of where we're going. So let's mix the two a bit. And the other one was Mercedes-Benz new car they're coming out with, which I've owned Mercedes-Benz cars for a very long time. Very nice cars.
Me too.
And I think it's really cool that they're trying to do this, but in the same facet of our conversation, it still scares me a bit here. Now, their car in the article is looking at going from a variation of no automation at all, I'm going to drive, to driver's assistance. So it's like basic driver assistance, to partial automation, which is going to allow me to start mixing some stuff together, reducing overall driving risk. Then it goes to conditional automation. So the driver is still necessary, but not required to monitor the environment. So the car is basically monitoring everything in the environment. To high automation, which it's capable of driving itself and all the functions. To full automation, I guess, which is pretty much you can sit in the passenger seat and take a nap. They're saying in the article here, when you shared it with me, right, that they're saying they'll take on the liability. They trust their system so much so that they will accept liability if the system causes a crash when it is operational. It warned that if a driver fails to comply with their duty of care, they would be legally responsible for collision. And that had me thinking then, you're telling me, and this is again when we say the laws haven't caught up, right? It says comply with the duty of care. Well, then I asked myself, I said, okay, what really does that mean, right? And then I asked the question, I said, well, duty of care said, I know I wrote this up in here or something, but I had to go search it again. We're not lawyers by trade. So, like most
I don't
of
even
this,
play
we
it
have
on
to
TV.
look up.
Like I just, yeah.
And when I did the search, which I don't know where my search window went, duty of care was basically, so where I went with the conversation, because I don't see my one piece, but I know where I want to go with it, is one of the line items that was in there is duty of care would be like not driving drunk. Okay. So for our conversation here, that's the one I want to pull out. And my ask then is based on the way they worded that. If I own this car and I feel like I drank a little too much at dinner and I'm going to get in the car, but I can put the car on fully automate and drive me home. Now the car has an accident, but I'm not driving.
That's right.
Are you liable for the car because it had an accident, but because I was drinking and I'm in the car, do I now negate it because of duty of care, even though I wasn't driving? Like there's a really weird format there.
Yeah. I agree. I think some of this also comes down to like in a Tesla, like if it thinks that like it's not sure exactly what to do, it's going to be like, hey, like you gotta pick up the wheel here, and if you don't, it just goes and parks on the side of the road.
Well, that's what you would hope is just have it park, right? Like if it can.
Well, yeah. I think the problem, there's a lot of gray area here, and the way that these things are worded sounds an awful like. I can be rather cynical sometimes, and I'm going to be rather cynical about this. Like the headline says, oh yeah, we're totally going to be liable if this thing crashes. But really in the end, like what I read here is that, yeah, like we're going to be liable unless we told you that you needed to pick up the steering wheel and you didn't. And, those like there's going to be a lot of ways to get outside of that. And I would imagine that even if they say something like this, they're not going to be legally bound to actually sticking to it anyway.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see if this is written into the contract when you purchase the car,
right, when you buy the car. Yeah.
And that kind of a thing. And it's, to me, I don't know how they could stand up and say something like this, knowing where things are, unless they were just 100% sure that they can, oh yeah, like this doesn't really mean anything.
I think just that word alone, because of the current laws, will help them to figure out all that gray area to kind of only be liable if it's truly like a programming error or a mechanical error that they would be held responsible anyway. So it's great SEO for your title, but outside of that, not so much. And it brings me back to the other article just to kind of round out what we're talking about. And the other article talked about the key to ensure that all stakeholders, users, developers, and everyone else along the chain bears enough responsibility to ensure that AI safe AI safely and effectively basically, works the way it's supposed to work. And it's pretty much everyone in the supply chain of it has to be responsible. You can't, you can't say not the developers, you can't say not the company, you can't say the car manufacturer by themselves. Like, it's everybody. And there's a certain point of just responsibility for, all human beings, and we help each other. But there's also got to be a physical one, or a monetary, I guess, because that's the way our world works, on top of that as well. So that there's a reason to pay attention. There's a reason to make sure. You and I do consulting with a lot of companies on technology, and testing gets left off often. Like, that scares me every time I use anything.
I don't normally test, but when I do, it's in production.
Right, exactly. So and I think that needs to be taken into account, as well as when they're trying to get things out into production, when companies are trying to save some money on a large project. Unfortunately, real world or not, they don't want to. But at the end of the day, lots of times, certain practices for testing, certain practices around other ways of constructing and, building software and other components, edges are cut, right? And that's going to show up in the final product. And when we're starting to talk about something that's going to keep you alive, you don't want to cut corners. I appreciate whether I have to wait for my plane or not. I appreciate at the airport when the airline makes sure that they do a check of the airplane before we go back in the air every time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, let's go ahead and retorque those bolts down to spec. Just to see
make sure the door seal's still working. Yeah, it's all right.
Wait, nobody likes to having an eventful flight.
No.
Uneventful flights, way to go. Eventful flights, not so much.
Nope.
And same thing with a car ride. Like, you don't want, and to me, I think this is like, a lot of this really shows how, full self-driving cars, and back to the point I made earlier, full self-driving cars and humans just don't mix. And because you have all, like, whether it's liability, whether it's all of these things tied together, like the minute that even if you get outside of self-driving cars, the minute that you inject a human into a process, it will go horribly, horribly wrong at some point. And, this is like, there's so many questions to be had here that it's hard to really try to wrap it up into a nice bow.
Yeah. So I got one for you. So there was a story, and I'm going to go back. I think it's Isaac Asimov's, maybe not. It's in a book I have of short stories, and yeah, it's Isaac Asimov. And it's, in the future world, there'll be a man and a dog, and the man will be there to feed the dog, and the dog is there to keep the man from touching the computer.
Well, we know why it's not a man and it's a cat, because the cat got run over by the AI.
Exactly. Oh, this was a good conversation, my friend.
Yeah, I think that's a great spot to end it. I think this was super, super intriguing. I think there's an awful lot we can dig down deeper into some of these different topics, but this new technology is really, really interesting. And, this is a great time to be alive, seeing how and where all this stuff's going to go. Till next time, man. Appreciate it.
Cheers, my friend.
Cheers.